Welcome to Heartspeak Podcast, episode 44, Moments in Time. Recently, friends of mine, we got together for a wonderful afternoon and then a lovely evening meal. And even though we were all in harmony, something happened that caused a moment in time to come together. Now, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that one of us started a cascade of reactions from the others. One particular action caused reactions. And who started that? It could have been me, could have been someone else. But because of that one moment, that meeting point of all our energies, each of us reacted to that event. And it caused us all to look at ourselves and recognize these old patterns that keep coming up for us. If you ever saw that film Crash, it was a wonderful film of saying, here's the crash. All these cars were involved, all the people in the cars were involved, but it wasn't just that moment in time. The movie went back and showed us how everybody got to that moment in time, that fulcrum, that focus, that point, that nexus, and then what everybody did because of that meeting. And I became fascinated after this meeting with my friends of how many times that happens to us. We think that was just a moment where it just so happened we bumped into this person or something happened, but we don't always consider all the events, all the experiences, everything that led up to that particular moment. And so commonly, because it's a crisis, or it's because it's chaotic, or because it's difficult, or because it brings up emotions, it's almost as if we just say, okay, what do I need to do to calm it all down again? Let's move on. Let's say sorry. Let's forgive each other. Let's forget what happened. Or if it's from a medical point of view, let's get someone to fix the problem so we can go on in exactly the same way we've been going. But what if those moments in time where we have pre-programmed into our life? We have said, on that day, at that time, we will come together. Now, I can think of times where that's happened in my life, where it just so happened I was sitting on a plane and the person next to me was the person I needed to meet. Some of you have heard that that's how I originally met Caroline Mace, who has been a very important person in my life. But that was back in 1987, that she just happened to be sitting next to me on a plane as we were both going to the wonderful centre of Findhorn in Scotland. And maybe just I'll take a little step out to tell you this story, because at that moment I had only just come across Findhorn. I had been to experimental, a week of experiencing week at Findhorn. But this was the first conference. I thought, I'll go to that conference because it's on holistic care. And when I made that decision, I then went into a process that maybe some of you are familiar with. Well, shall I go, shan't I go? Then when I made my mind up that I would go, I then went, well, shall I drive or should I fly? And that little discussion went on in my mind for some time. Then I thought, okay, if I'm going to fly, shall I fly to Inverness or Edinburgh? That went on for a while. Then making my decision, I said, okay, shall I fly in the morning or the afternoon? And that went on for a while. And finally, I made my decision to fly in the morning to Inverness. And out of the 120 odd people on that plane, I just happened to sit next to Caroline. And I just happened to say to her, where are you going? That wasn't always my way. I don't always talk to people next to me in a plane. But I just happened to say that, and she said Findhorn. And because I had an early awareness of who she was, but it was still early days. I thought, oh, I'll go on her workshop. And it was during that workshop that I had this profound insight that I needed to change my life dramatically. And I left general practice and started off on another path that I was to take. Now, you could have said it was just coincidence. Of course, I know anybody listening doesn't believe in that. But what I would say is that we were destined to meet. But what if I had made a decision to fly to Edinburgh or to drive or to go in the afternoon, not the morning? I always get this idea that my guides were kind of saying, okay, she's going in the morning. No, she's not. She's going in the afternoon. How many times do we decide to turn left and not right? How many times do we cancel an appointment when we were very excited about going there? How many times I've had this in my seminars where someone got the last space on a seminar, on a trip. It was exactly that moment that they needed to be there. That was destined. And yet, how many times do we miss that point? We miss, what if I had said, oh, I'm not going. Other things are more important. Would I have ever met Caroline? Would I ever have had that opportunity to be in her presence and make such a monumental decision? Would my guides have made sure that I did meet someone who would nudge me forward to make these changes? And I don't think there's only one choice. I have this idea that we make a decision that we want to make sure that we turn left at a certain time in our life. I was 33 then. 33 is the age when you start doing the work you came here to do. Now, therefore, I felt that there was a destiny call, but I could have ignored the destiny call entirely. And in fact, when I did come down from Findhorn, or flew down back to my lovely little house, I thought, you're crazy. You're going to give up everything that you've worked for, a beautiful general practice, all the work you put into becoming a doctor, because you went to a place that talks to animals and talks to vegetables. You're crazy. And yet then I got another message was, so you haven't got the courage to do it again. Once again, you're going to turn your back on your soul's journey. And you never tempt me in that way, because in that way I heard, so you haven't got the courage once again. And so it was like, yes, I have. And after that, I went into my general practice. I talked to my partners, and everybody there said, of course, we knew you were going to leave. Like, I didn't. How come you did? But when you know you're making that right decision, then everything falls into place. And I like to say that by the time it got to lunchtime on that first day I went back to work, I'd already sold my house, closed my practice, and sold my car. So you always know when you're going in the right direction because everything happens. Or let's say you make the right decision, I want to say. But because we have free will, there's never just one person giving us the nudge. And so I have this image that you may go to that restaurant, and you maybe go to that bar, or maybe you walk along that street, or maybe you go into a park. In that 10 minutes, which one of those would you go to? And so I have this image that your spirit world lines up all these people in different places, just in case you make a different decision, allowing you free will. So there's one person waiting in the restaurant for you, there's one person waiting in the park for you, there's a person leaning against the bar for you. And they all know that this is the contract you made with them, that they would be in that place at that time. I hope you've had these moments. I almost call them my angels. Did these people even exist? Or did they just go, hey, Christine, we said we'd be here, here's the message, off you go. And that those angels just disappeared out your life. I wonder if you've had moments like this. I hope you have. Because it's not about getting it right or wrong, and we get so caught up in the right and wrong. It's just choice. Whether I went to the restaurant, the park, whether I didn't even go out that night, it would all be right. Because inevitably we end up almost in the same place, but maybe at different times or from a different perspective. As an astrologer, I see people having these moments, that they do turn up in that moment. So 5 years hence, as an astrologer, I could say, this is this moment. But what I couldn't say to you is, oh, in 5 years' time, you're going to be happily married. In 5 years' time, you're going to have a baby. In 5 years' time, all I can say is that this is a moment, again, a moment in time where you can make a decision, or a moment in time where you'll be giving birth. But I can't tell you if you're giving birth to a baby, or giving birth to a book, or giving birth to yourself. Just as you might say, am I going to meet a partner? I might be able to say, well, in 5 years' time, you're going to have a great relationship, but it might be with yourself. It might be with an animal. It might be with a pet. It might be with a loved one. Who knows? But what we can say is that that experience is waiting for you, that moment to come, to connect to something that creates wholeness in you. So let me go back to my moment in time with my friends. Because of one person's decision, everybody reacted to that decision, to that event, in a different way. It fired off everybody's past. In other words, it was like, everybody does that to me, nobody listens to me, everybody does that to me. I knew that would happen. And when we are in that state, we often just recognize a pattern, but we don't always recognize the opportunity for change. That makes sense? So that unless you sit as we did and talk about this and say, wow, this is a hurt that I felt in the past. This is a path I've taken in the past. This is my normal reaction. That's what we often say. Oh, I really hate it when people do that. Oh, I really get fired up when that happens. Oh, I always feel alone when that happens. But when we use words like always, this always happens to me. I knew that would be, this brought up this for me. This is really good. This brought up a feeling of rejection I've had in the past. But unless we actually decide to do something about that and say, wow, what do I need to change in order to stop that reaction? It will just keep happening. And that's what I feel we fail to do so often. Sometimes what we do when that reaction comes up, we might say, oh, I'm really sorry that happened. I'm sorry I did that to cause you to react, or I'm sorry that I reacted in that way. But sorry, as I spoke about last time, is not necessarily the answer. It's not necessarily you forgiving someone or someone forgiving you. It's more about you forgiving yourself, or allowing yourself to go deeply into what part of me am I ignoring that needs to be brought to my heart, which is true forgiveness. What part of me, my wounded self, needs to come to my heart? Where am I not listening to that part? Where am I abandoning that part? Just hope that makes it clearer for you that reactions we have to the outside world are often just reflecting or helping us to go deeper into our own inner journey and how we bring ourselves into wholeness, which is really what this key is about. How do we know what's happening? Now, we can, or you may have heard this statement, that when we heal ourselves, we heal the last 7 generations and the next 7 generations still to come. All right. But we also carry the last 7 generations of woundedness and joys, and we also carry the next 7 generations of wounds and joys. Now, before you go, what you talking about, the next generation? I'll just stay with the past. But we do actually already carry the wounds of our futures, the next 7 generations. And that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to say, when these moment of times happen, these pivotal moments, what can I do to bring healing to myself, not to the past 7 generations or the next, but what is in me from, let's say, the past generations that I'm going to do something differently this time? And it isn't just about doing something that's opposite. Maybe you had a mother who didn't love you, so you love all your children a lot. But can you love the unlovable mother or the mother who couldn't nurture you? It isn't just how do you nurture your children, but where in you is that mother? So I'm saying to you is, yes, there is the fact that our ancestors influence our decisions now, but we could also say from a spiritual point of view, you chose those ancestors. Some of you are saying, I'm sure I didn't. I wouldn't have picked that ancestor. But if we say that you are a unique and powerful individual, you would have chosen very wisely the ancestors that reflect your own wholeness. So this would be all types of ancestors. And the ones which you are most upset about are the ones in yourself, are the ones that you object to in your ancestors. So you might love the parts of you that you receive from ancestors that are loving and giving and brave and blah, blah. But you might not like the ones that are cowardice or cowards and abusive or not, narcissistic. And they're the pieces that, as I've said to you so often, are the pieces you're trying to accept within yourself. Again, horror of horrors that you may say that you are not pure as the driven snow. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to heal your ancestors, you have to accept that they exist within you as much as you exist within them, or within your 7 generations still to come. Now, I love family constellation work, which looks at this, ancestral patterns. What are you carrying from your ancestral patterns, which isn't you? And I've looked at that, and I love that, because sometimes we do carry a family motto that we keep saying to ourselves, or we've heard from our parents say it, and then realize it's nothing to do with us. This was an ancestor way back that was important, an important statement about themselves, but it's not true to us. So let's say you had someone who was in a mental asylum or a psychiatric ward, and you may have a tremendous fear of craziness. And so when you meet that being in spirit, which family constellation work does, that person may say, you're not me. Let go, you're not me. I was in that place, but that isn't who you are. And there's a tremendous healing in that. And I would say, just because you react to it or you have that fear, there is a part of you that in another life, now we go to other lives, may well have been crazy. So it's very hard to just speak about ancestral lineage and how it's affecting us. So I just want to repeat, not only do our ancestors, past and future, affect us, but also our past lives affect us. And often the ancestors that affect us, our family lineage that affect us the most, will have turned up in what we call past lives. It's all a story. And then you might say, well, it's not a story, it's real. But what I'm asking you to look at is, what is the subpersonality? What is the part of you that exists both in that past life, in that ancestor, in a story that says, this is who I am now, that is asking me to make a different decision? Does that make sense? So that don't get lost in the ancestor, don't get lost in the past life. Get in tune with what part of my past life, what part of my ancestor am I expressing now? And I come back to what am I expressing now in this moment of time? And if I'm reacting in that moment of time, I'm feeling the full force of all those ancestors in that moment, and all my past lives in that moment, and all my choices in that moment now. And therefore, that moment in time is not a crisis, a chaotic moment that you didn't choose. What if you, as a mighty soul, chose that moment to make a different decision. And so, yes, you react. You react because here it comes again, like a train pushing you, boom, 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 boom. So you react because you've seen it before. But your reaction is not, should not be the source of your future creations. Let me say that again. Your reactions should not be the source of future creations. Your reactions are purely a signal to say, is this the decision you want to make? Or what decision do you choose to make based on this? Does that make sense? Now, first of all, you have to be accountable for your reactions. You can't just say, that person made me do that, this is what happened, I wasn't there. You have to say, yeah, I did react. And yes, I did speak out of turn, or maybe I wasn't kind when I said that, or maybe I did this. So being accountable for our reactions is the first step. The next step is, what part of me reacted? What came up? My frightened child, my rejected child, inner child, the part of me that just feels that I'm out of control. I hate that. You know, whatever it is, what part of you had that reaction? Now you can take it back to, I remember when I felt that first time, it was when my father did this, my mother did this, or past life. That's absolutely true. But finding the source doesn't always help us to make better decisions. I've got to tell you. Because it sometimes can be that the source is way hidden. And so many times people will tell me about what's happened in this childhood, but I can clearly see this has happened way back in history. And all you did was collect these experiences around you, or you connected these people around you to give you the same experience as a past life. So what's more important is, what part of me is reacting, and what decision do I want to make for that piece of me to react differently? First thing we have to do is to accept that part of us into our heart. I accept my wounded child into my heart. The second part is, what does my wounded child need from me at this time? And that's what brings the change. What different decision? Sometimes it's just, oh, come on, I need to laugh at myself. Sometimes I need to spend more time with myself. Sometimes I need to not judge myself. Whatever it is, this is the moment where you make a different decision. And it reminds me so much of when I meet people who have had an illness, and I'll say, as you've heard me say, what was happening, what was going on in that moment that you got that illness, and that's that moment in time. And how commonly people will tell me not what was happening just before the illness struck, but what diagnosis they got, what tests they had, what treatment they're on, which has absolutely no relevance to anything. It's almost, that's the way we lose ourselves. It's almost if we could freeze frame that one moment just before we had the accident, just before we were diagnosed, or perhaps even knew that we were sick. What was going on there? That's that moment. What was the moment in time that was the pivotal point to bring about change? And it may not have been immediate. In other words, sometimes we know, our intuition knows we should have made a change 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We shouldn't have married that person. We should have said no and yes. And yet we may get sicker, or we may get more miserable, or we try and make excuses, or maybe we try and make a go of it. But what was that pivotal moment? That would be a fascinating thing for you, for me to be able to do. What was that moment way back when we knew we were being given a choice, and instead we continued on a path pretending we hadn't got choice, and ended up, as I see as a doctor, getting sick or getting ill because we knew right back here that was that moment in time. And everything came together to offer us the energy of change. And when we do, we free up the last 7 generations. We free up the next 7 generations. And so it's almost as if our ancestors are actually our cheerleaders. Come on, you can do it. Here's that moment in time. Oh, she missed it again. she failed, not failed, but she missed the opportunity, would have to set another one up. And that's that courage to follow your heart, follow your intuition. So I just want to bring in one other small shift that's been coming up for me. I've recently been rewriting my book that I wrote around 2012. I wrote it back in 2006, and it's now going to be published next year, February, and it's going to be called The Heart of the Great Mother. And I'm really pleased with the book and how it's just as pertinent now as it was when I wrote it in 2006. But what I learned when the publishers chose to use the title 2012 for this original book was that I experienced a lot of knowledge or other people's opinions about 2012, which I may not have got otherwise. Again, it was one of those choices I made on a subconscious level that really fed my soul. So here we were in 2012, and some of you might say, well, that was a non-event. Please, it was not a non-event. We did birth a new world, and the new world is present, waiting for us. But what also happened is we entered the world of ether. What is ether? It is the combination of the four other elements, earth, air, fire, water, synthesis of them all. And it is the number 5. And some of you know this is the pentagon. So 4 is a number of structure, 5 is a number of magic and change. So entering into ether, we moved into this place of magic. We were able now to be able to shift our consciousness in ways we hadn't been able to before. But the element of ether also brought with us different aspects of what it meant to be in this new world. One aspect of that is we are looking to create a world of unity through diversity. And my heart is greatly saddened when diversity isn't accepted, but it also is not accepted that your diversity is far more than your color or your gender or your religion or your culture or your gender preference. You are much more than that. And your individuality isn't what you see on the surface, it's the beauty and the magnificence that lives within. If that expresses itself through your color or your gender, etc., good, but it doesn't define you on the outside. Your definition is from within the inside out. So accepting yourself as diverse and accepting your own uniqueness is absolutely what I want to see in everybody. But then seeing that that uniqueness comes together in a desire for unification. Unification does not mean everybody being the same. It's about everybody being a different piece of the jigsaw, creating the oneness and the wholeness. And if we deny anybody's uniqueness, then we can't be whole as it is. So yes, our fight for those who feel their uniqueness is not accepted. But please, that fight is for that soul's uniqueness, that how it expresses itself is less important than that it comes from the soul. That's what we want to see. Show yourself for who you are from deep within. So that's one aspect of unity through diversity. The next aspect is with the world of ether, that which I do unto you, I do unto myself. Now, this is not about being empathic. It is the fact that we are all one, and therefore our actions and our thoughts influence not only someone around us, but inevitably also influence us. So you imagine that every thought you have and every action you take, every way you describe someone else, every thought you have about someone else comes back to you, and you feel the same pain that that person is feeling inside your own being, whether it's a physical attack or an emotional attack. And the same way, if you feel good towards others, that comes back to you and you feel that. But I wonder whether or not we would change our awareness and what we do if we knew that that was true. So once again, I'm coming back to that moment in time. If we knew and accepted we were a collective, that everything we do has an influence not only on those around us, but on ourselves and our own inner collective. Would we do the same things? I was recently just walking through nature, and I watched as trees entwined around each other, or moved out of the way of another, or where there was a rock, the tree grew round the rock. Or how nature will conform not in a submissive way, but in a collective way. We have, I believe, as humans, such a poor understanding of collective. We talk about the collective, but it is often in a defensive way rather than a truly, if I step across my beliefs, if I step across my individuality and see you as part of the collective, how do we interact with each other? We are not alone. We are not isolated. These moments in time affect us all. And instead, it often impacts us to almost want to separate more, not trust people. Whereas when we're working from a collective, when someone drops a stone, it ripples out, and each of us is affected in a positive way. How do certain events, if you looked at events in your life, how have they affected you in a positive way? How, I know that when, for instance, people have died in my life, yes, I had tremendous grief, but their death affected me in a positive way because I would have never have taken the path I've taken had they still been living. Had I got into the university I wanted to get into, I grieved because I didn't, because my pride was hurt. Oh my goodness, the university I did get into, the Royal Free, was absolutely what I needed to get into, especially since it was originally came because women weren't allowed into men's colleges to learn medicine. And because of that, by the time I entered the Royal Free, we had very strong women who were surgeons and cardiologists and consultants, and that inspired my life to be a strong woman. So every moment in time allows us not only to have a decision, but influences this in the future to make a decision that takes us home to ourselves. And the last little piece I want to say about this world of ether, there's a lovely book, The Mutant Message Down Under by Marla Morgan. And she talks about how the Aborigines in Australia work as a collective. And they telepathically work as in a collective. They don't have to say, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Their first decision is, how do we work as a collective with me expressing my fullness as an individual? Other way round. When I express my fullness as an individual, how do I bring that to the collective? We don't know that as well as we should. Sorry to use that should. But we are entering into the age of Aquarius, where self-accountability, self-awareness then brings unity through diversity. So the more you know yourself, the more you're accepting of yourself, you're not looking for acceptance from other people, the more you say, this is who I am in my wholeness, the more you can enter into collectiveness. The more that you say everybody has to be like me for me to feel secure, the less confident you are in yourself and the less likely you'll work in a collective way. So in Marla Morgan's book, she talks about the Aborigines, and she says, why is it that we as perhaps more Western people, and apologies if that's not who you are, but why is it that and I'll say I as an English person, or I as American, cannot work so collectively? And she said, it's because you have secrets. And I thought that was a magical way of seeing it. Is as long as we have secrets, as long as we have parts of ourselves that we have to hide from others, as long as we're ashamed of parts of ourselves, as long as we feel unlovable, then we will always have secrets, and we will always wall ourselves off from allowing anybody to be too close. And she was saying it's when we bring to our hearts all those parts of ourselves, and that we have nothing to hide from anybody else, and therefore we see ourselves in everybody else and everybody else in us, that we can truly be telepathic. And I remember a friend of mine also saying, true telepathy comes when there is no fear. And I think this is where we are working towards. That in that moment, when we have that moment in time when something happens, we see with a smile on our faces how that event ripples through our lives in a positive way, rather than walling ourselves off and going back into our secret world. And so I hope I've helped you to look at a moment in time. I hope you will look back at times in your life where those moments in time have been focus points, of pivotal moments of change. And don't see, I made the wrong decision. You made a decision. You may have made a decision that made life a little bit more tricky for you than you needed it to be. But you made a decision. Never be a victim of your choices or your decisions. But make that decision and make it, did that reaction bring me out so I could be a part of a collective? Did I feel stronger in myself? Did I feel more open? Or did I shut myself down? Make decisions that allow you to be the unique individual you are without any need for approval from other people or fear of criticism. Be yourself, wholly. In those moments in time, we have all agreed to turn up in that moment. That's the beauty of it. I made a contract to be here today to speak to you. Please fulfill your contract to myself, to your family, to yourself. Listen to your heart, follow your heart. And I look forward to be with you next time. Many blessings.
Thanks for listening to the Heart Speak podcast with Dr. Christine Page. Remember to check out other episodes in the podcast archive section on www.christinepage.com. And do share with friends, family, and colleagues. Join us next time for another edition of Heart Speak.